Three, two, one. You ready? You're listening to the Real Pineapple Podcast Network. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, theys, and gays. This is the Real Pineapple. This is your humble host, Hunter, here. Hope you're having a great day, night, weekend, whenever you're checking this out. I'm really happy and privileged to be able to talk to director of the new film American Murderer. We've got a lot to cover in this movie. Matthew Gentile. Matthew, how you doing, sir?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it. So I got a chance to check this out a couple days ago, or last night, pardon me. What is time anymore? And and I gotta say, man, I've got quite a few questions in the best way about this. So
Great.
looking through your filmography, I know it looks like I know you did a short of this back in 2019. So I guess my first question right off the gate, why turn this into a feature film as opposed to just keep it as a short?
Well, it was actually designed kind of the inverse way of that. I had the script written at the time I did the short, or a version of the screenplay, but what happened initially was I was kind of struggling to get my screenplay read around town.
Okay.
Anyone who's worked in Los Angeles can tell you that sometimes getting a screenplay read is challenging just because
Fair.
agents, executives, business people, the gatekeepers, they have a lot of scripts to read every week. So getting someone to take 2 hours out of their day or an hour and a half and read yours can be challenging, especially when you're someone who's not established. So what I did was I actually went and I shot one scene from the script from American Murder screenplay to advertise the script essentially,
Okay.
and get people piqued and intrigued. And so we did a SWAT invasion sequence, which I won't spoil when that happens, but there is a SWAT invasion. You've probably seen in the trailer.
Yep.
And we shot that as the proof of concept, and that kind of helped. It was a really effective piece for me because it was like a 5-minute sequence. Had some cool music and some cool action, and kind of just gave a sense of the tone and the vibe. And I'm not the first person to do a proof of concept short. Damien Chazelle did it to get Whiplash made. Billy Bob Thornton famously did it for Sling Blade, went and shot a scene. So it's a common way, to help get an independent film made, is just do a little sample of it to get, financiers, producers, companies interested.
Okay. So I mean, I'll say just right off the gate, one thing I really appreciate about your style is how grimy things look. I was the one of the notes I have here. I'm like, I feel like I was watching a GTA film at points because the way that and I'll just kind of jump in here, but the way that Jason in the movie is portrayed, I love the slow spiral that we get with him, because at first he just seems like kind of a douche. I mean, and he is a douche, but
Yeah.
but the fascinating thing about him is that you have these little glimmers, and this is something I love about your script, where you think maybe he's making a turn, maybe he's not as terrible as I think he is. And without spoiling things, I love the fact that he's not only terrible, but he's more terrible than I even initially thought he was.
Right.
And
Totally right. Yeah.
so for you, because you are the director and you're the writer on this, obviously the whole based on a true story thing, that that's a common phrase and with movies and everything now. But for you having both those responsibilities, where does your line fall in as far as where I embellish here, where I leave this part out here? Like, how does that kind of factor in as you're putting this all together?
It's a great question. And yeah, it sounds like you really got the movie, which is great. And I love that you said GTA because, it's the early 2000s. That's the period we're depicting. So it has that fun, kind of trashy, pop vibe.
Yeah.
In terms of answering your question, so, I was always trying to, with this film, so it is based on a true story, in that a lot of the events in the film did happen. That said, my early drafts of the script were pretty close to the facts as I had heard them.
Okay.
Right. And then as I started to develop it more and more, because ultimately, the goal of drama, right, and great drama, is to create a character who you're going to want to spend time with, right?
Yeah.
And That doesn't mean you have to like them, because I think a lot of people watch this and not like Jason, think he's a douche. I've had some people like him, I've had some people hate him, and everywhere in between. But really, to make him a fully three-dimensional, character that you get a 360-degree view of by the end of the film. But the nature of the way we tell this story, as you've seen, is you're seeing Jason Derek Brown occasionally from his own perspective, but more from different ones. You're
Yeah.
seeing him from the point of view of his mother, or Ryan Phillippe's character, the FBI agent who's hunting him, or Adina Menzel's character, his love interest, landlady, right, and his sister Chantal Vincent. So so as you're seeing him from all these different perspectives, you're seeing that this was a guy who ultimately meant many things to many different people. In terms of adhering to the facts, eventually, as I kept working on the script, I realized that to make this work as what I wanted it to be, which is, a crime, thriller, drama, tragedy, right?
Yeah.
A character study disguised as a cat and mouse thriller, right? I had to embellish, I had to dramatize, and I had to kind of have that freedom. So a question I often get asked is, did you consult the family when you made the movie, or did you consult
That
the
was my
film
next
people?
question. Yeah.
And I didn't. I made a choice not to, because there was a lot. First off, there was a lot of stuff out there about Jason Derek Brown. He made a lot of images of himself. He filmed himself throwing a lavish boat party, which we do recreate to a certain degree in the film.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of details in the movie that are like, a lot of the wardrobe choices we made. That red hoodie Jason wears is what he was photographed in many times, or the green shirt he wears to the nightclub is based off a real green shirt we saw him wearing in photographs. So there
Okay.
was a lot of trying to be authentic, right? But I gave myself a lot of room as the director and the screenwriter to really go and imagine and dramatize events, because the way things play out often in real life don't often make for necessarily a great
True.
screenplay or a great movie. So ultimately it's the job of the dramatist, in this case me, to dramatize it. And so there was a lot of work I had to do to make that. But I think at the end of the day, I think we stayed close to, at least I think, the emotional truth of the situation, which was, this was a character who was a con man and deceived a lot of people and made a lot of people fall for him and fall into his web. And that's what the movie's about. And that's what it's unpacking. So at the end of the day, even though, yes, we absolutely did make things up, and this is true crime fiction, right? It's not true crime documentary or true crime, straight. It's a fiction. It's a fictional imagination of, it's an interpretation of things that happened. So, if you were to take 6 other directors and have them tell the story, I'm sure you would get wildly different, takes on it. So what is real anyway?
Right. Exactly. Especially in 2022. One thing I will say that it's funny that you brought up documentary, because that's something I actually have here. I love the fact that at points it feels like a pseudo documentary within the film itself, especially
Right.
when Ryan Phillippe, who I think is one of the most kind of criminally underrated actors, kind of constantly, which
Yeah.
is weird how that always keeps happening. Because I think about something like Shooter that he was in, and seeing him in this with you, and you do a great job directing the film, but him in particular, for me, what, how casting wise, as far as getting these actors in the roles, because you get some. I mean, he's a big get. Tom Pelphrey, who I loved on, who's also on Ozark, both on Banshee before that.
Yeah.
He's a powerhouse in this, and
Agreed.
the way he does get into these very grimy moments. Again, we're going to try to stay away from spoilers, but there's a scene on a golf course that he has, and I was just sitting here laughing, because I'm just like, God, he's such a piece of crap. Like, the way he manipulates and turns
Yeah.
people. And as we were talking about earlier, the whole, you think he might have learned something, but then you realize, oh no, he's like conning me into thinking he might be he might
Yeah.
be learning,
Totally.
which is so ironic. But to get someone like Ryan Phillippe in that role in particular, because you need someone who's going to be obviously driven to get that character home, as far as just not being an FBI agent, but having almost a moral obligation to take Jason down. Like, why did Phillippe fit that role so well for you, as far as how you're directing him and everything?
It's a great question. I mean, and I agree with you. I think he's a great actor, and someone who, you think about the experience Ryan Phillippe has had. I mean, he's worked with Tony Scott, Clint Eastwood, Robert Altman. I mean, heroes of mine, and he's made so many films. He's a true pro in every
Yeah.
sense of the word. And I mean, I was very lucky with this entire cast. All of them really exceeded my wildest dreams of what this film could be. I mean, they were really an incredible group. As far as Ryan goes, whenever I cast a role, I like to make a list. When I have the actors that I'm considering or thinking about going out to, of what traits the characters have, and then I try to look and I try to see if they, how it's a match.
Yeah.
So, in the case of Jason with Tom, it was like Jason he needs to be charismatic, right? You can't have a non-charismatic actor playing Jason. He needs
Yeah.
to be physical, right? Because it's a physical role. He does pull-ups. He's off for the shirt a lot, right? So he's got to be someone who has a physicality to him and acts physically. You know, he's got to be unpredictable, right? He's got to be able to flip on a dime. He's got to be able to be sad and crazy, and cry, and he's got to be able to kind of have those notes. And Tom clearly had that for Ozark and Banshee and other projects he's been in. I mean, he has that. With Lance Lysing's character, Ryan's character, what you really want is somebody who, he's button up, right? He's professional. He cares a
Yeah.
lot about his job. He has a sense of justice, right? A sense of morality, right? He might be a little he has all these things. And so when I look at Ryan, and the roles he's played and who as I know him from like just having worked with him, it totally makes sense because Ryan comes from a military family.
Okay, I
Ryan's
didn't
played a
know
lot of
that.
cops
That makes
before.
sense. Okay.
And so it just, it's become so apparent to me that he was always, I mean, he was actually my first choice for this role, which you often don't get your first choice. They say don't write them down, and they say don't write for actors because you get your heart broken because they're not available or whatnot.
Makes
And
sense.
Ryan actually initially I thought wasn't going to be available for this, and I was pretty disappointed. But then when it turned out he was on the show Big Sky, when
Yeah,
we were
so
going
good.
out to him, but it was a bait and switch. And so because they said he was on the show, they were like, Ryan's not available. We're like, okay. And then we found out he was going to get killed off. So he was, because he got killed off in that show, he was available to do my movie. And working with him was, yeah, a total dream come true. I mean, I kind of viewed him like a mentor almost. Because he's directed a movie too, and a good movie also.
Yeah.
And he's just a really generous, cool, good guy, super easy to work with. Just, yeah, total professional.
So I'm happy to hear the experience with him was so great because that brings me to his brother, or who plays his brother in Paul Schneider, who I immediately
Yeah.
think of from Parks and Rec, is immediately where my brain goes to.
Yeah.
And that relationship in particular, if there's any, I hesitate to use the word humanity, but I can't think of anything else, so I'll go with humanity. But if there's any humanity to Jason that I really found truly captivating, it's the relationship between his sister, his brother, and his mom.
Right.
And I'll start with his brother here because there's a scene. Oh yeah, not spoiling, but there's a scene where he kind of gets him out of jam, and that leads to the golf course scene later on in the film. And that initial scene, I went, oh, he's that sibling. He's that sibling who would who would get you in trouble, not let that go, and go, hey, remember that time, years ago I did this for you.
Right.
As far as getting the complexities of those relationships, because I think the relationships are shockingly complex in a very short amount of time. With David and Jason in particular, how important was it to flesh out that relationship? I mean, between the siblings, as far as like how you kind of approach that initially.
It was very important, as you said, because you kind of just nailed what the movie's about, which is it's about family. This is those relationships, the mother, the sister, and the brother are the three most crucial. Idina's character also, but in a different way, because there he's trying to recreate family a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And the father. So, it's a story about family. That's the theme underneath it all. Every movie has a one-word theme, and the one-word theme for American Murder, as I saw it, was family. The brother relationship is very important, and that's that golf course scene you're talking about. It's a triggering scene because you really see these two brothers who they've drifted apart, and how here they are at this time, and he's in Jason's mind, he's desperate, right? He's not really conning anyone. He's just, I'm desperate, and I got to do this, and that's the way his brain works, and it's unfortunate, it's terrible, but that's just his calculation. Paul, I think, really did a great job grounding that role. He's another first choice.
Oh, really? Okay, nice.
I had him on top of my list, and we got him. And Paul's a great guy. He's been around he's pretty young, but he's been around for a long time. He's been, his first movie was George Washington, the indie film with David Gordon Green that was
Oh,
like
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
they kind of came together, and then they made that film All the Real Girls right after that. And that was actually Tom's telling us that he did that a monologue from that movie in his acting class at Rutgers. So
Small
it just
world. Okay.
Paul was a great asset to have on an indie movie like this because of his George Washington experience and All the Real Girls experience. He's played around in this realm before. So I was really grateful to have him, and I think their scenes are some of the strongest because these are two brothers who ultimately do love each other, even though there's been some mistreatment, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, it was something that, Tom, Paul, and I did do rehearsals on Zoom. We shot in the pandemic, so there was no in-person rehearsals,
Oh, wow.
um,
Okay.
but we did a lot of rehearsals on Zoom, and that they found some really great emotional truth in those scenes. And I think, even like I inspired me to do some tweaks and whatnot, but they really got it, both of them. I mean, that these two brothers had drifted apart and were in different places in their lives. And I don't know, I just think Tom and Paul really grounded them and played their scenes truthful and real. And I think that's why it works.
When we brought her up, obviously, because she's amazing. We brought up Idina Menzel in here, and that I love the way you brought up the fact that he's trying to recreate, the family he feels like he doesn't have anymore with her. And weirdly, and this is something I really found fascinating, he felt like at first it's definitely felt like, okay, like your conquest, that's all I care about. But then as Jason starts talking to her kid, you do feel that kind of, oh, I could be a mentor potentially to this kid. And at first, what he does, it's one of those kind of eye roll moments where I'm like, dude, why are you trying to get this kid in trouble already? But there's a weird sincerity to Jason in that moment or in those moments with him that I went, he doesn't really have that with anyone else, maybe independent of his sister. Like, because even his brother and him are so far apart, I don't know if that's a component in the relationship that can ever be recovered, which is its whole other discussion itself. But
Right.
talk to me though about getting having Idina Menzel in here because she gets a lot of scenes with Ryan Philby, and I love those scenes because he's almost taking pleasure in deconstructing who Jason is to her
Right.
and seeing her processing it in real time. Those are some of my favorite shots in the movie because you just see the heartbreak of even that little bit of doubt creeping in of going, maybe this guy's actually telling me what I need to hear, but I don't want to lose who I believe he is. So can you kind of talk me through that as far as their relationship?
Yeah, well, Adina was excellent. I mean, she was so fun to work with, and I was excited to work with her because I grew up loving her. I grew up in New York City. I was a theater geek, and
Okay.
I've seen her on Broadway multiple times. And she actually was a suggestion by her casting director. I didn't even think she would be. I didn't think someone of her caliber would be available to do this. It was kind of like, oh yeah, that's a cool idea. You think she'd want to do? And they were like, apparently she's looking to do this kind of thing. And we were like, okay. And I loved her in Uncut Gems and Skin. I saw her in a play called Skin Tight at the Geffen here in Los Angeles, which she was excellent in, a cool drama. And so I was really excited about her doing this because I don't think she's ever played a role really like this before.
Yeah.
So it was a fun. I think it worked as a casting choice because she's playing a bit against type. Um, but she's excellent in those scenes because I think again what you see is yes, Jason is lying to her and he's using her, and that's what Ryan's character. Part of what I think Brian plays really well in this movie is he's just so eager to expose Jason,
Yes.
right? He just wants to expose him for the monster that he is, and people just aren't seeing it. They're blinding themselves because they don't want to see the truth, which often happens with con artists and
True.
victims of them is they just don't want to see that they were deceived or used because that's harder to admit, which is why she lies about their relationship and all that. Sorry, a little spoiler. But I think you're right. I think she is heartbroken, and she a part of because I don't I think that was something really important that Adina did with the character, and Tom and I talked about you know with her, like all three of us when we did the rehearsals, we talked about making sure that her character was not just some stupid woman, right,
Yeah, because
who
that's a
got
trap you
taken.
could have fallen into very
And I
easily.
think we were all afraid of that. Like Adina was like, she's not some dumb woman, right? And I was like, no, 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 no. She's not. I never wanted her to be like, she's a strong, independent, single mother who this guy comes in and he really charms her, he just completely, sweeps her off her feet, and he's good with her kid. I mean, it just quickly endears her to him, because, I mean, I know from my parents, right? There's no better way to get close to a parent than to tell them you love their kid. That won't get them
Yep,
there,
that's
right?
hook, line, and sinker right there. Yep.
And I think, it's not totally opportune. Like, she asked him to watch him, so he has fun with the kid and he hangs out with the kid for a night, and he is like a cool friend to have, on the surface, that's what it looks like. But there's obviously something very wrong with it. So, but I think that's how these kinds of guys like Jason, these con artists, they work, is, the whole term comes from the term confidence trickster, right? Which means they earn your confidence and then they trick you.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of what's fun about it. I think that's what's, disturbing about it. But yeah, I think it's a very, that's a key relationship for sure.
Yeah. The scene, yeah, I can talk about this. There's a scene where he's talking to them at Thanksgiving, and just the way that plays out, I went, "Oh my God, you heartless son!" Like it's heartbreaking in the best way, and that
Yeah.
brings, and we haven't talked about him a lot, and we need to. We want to talk about Tom, obviously.
Yeah.
So you talk about having someone who has a physicality, who's able to flip on a dime. There's a scene, and oh, okay. There's a scene in this movie where he has a gun and he's talking to a guy, and I'll leave it just at that. And that's one of my favorite scenes you directed, because it starts off so kind of like ha 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 ha, and by the time that scene ends, I'm sitting here going, "Oh, I don't like the way that played out." it
Right.
just, and it's one of those things where you realize his sense of desperation, but you realize that there are levels to this. Like, he was going from being, oh, I need to pawn this watch, to, okay, I need to do this thing,
Yeah.
otherwise I'm screwed. Um, how was it as far as pitching the role to him? Because there are scenes where he's out on a boat with girls and he's drinking. There's this great scene in a club where he sees, you kind of go a little Candyman with it, which from a director perspective, I went, I love that shot. There's a couple shots in particular, people, you'll know them when you see them, that I went,
Oh, do you mean
oh
like this one? Or yeah.
yeah. I went, oh, I love that. But how was it pitching this to Tom? How far? I mean, was there anything he was uncomfortable with doing in the script? Because he's doing some stuff in the script that's not,
Yeah.
easy. So, kind of, how was it kind of
Great
approaching the?
question. Yeah. Yeah, he was pretty bold and fearless, I would say. At the outset, when the way it worked was we offered him the role. So I told my producer, who had recommended him to me, and I saw his stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, this is the guy. And we made an offer, and then he and I met. We met on a few different Zooms. I think we met twice. And the Zooms lasted about like an hour and a half, where we just talked, and we talked, saw how we got on. We really gelled. We seemed to really, we really clicked. Um, but I think he had some trepidations about playing it, just because exactly, I think it wasn't so much about what's in the script, is it too risque or this and that. He was very comfortable with that part. I just think he was more, concerned about how we were portraying Jason, and like, because he read the script and really clicked with it, but he was like, what does Matthew want to do with this? What kind of story are you trying to tell? Are you trying to go more like portrait of a sociopath, or are you trying to do something more grounded and human, and like, we're going to really like try to explore who this guy is and show the audience why he is the way he is? And I think once he understood that my intention was, even though I think we both would now say that Jason is probably a sociopath, we didn't really look at him that way. I didn't. I don't think Tom did either. We looked at him as this wounded, immature, calculating man-child bro who just became desperate in his own mind, and was pushed in his head to the point. Now, he did a horrendous, heinous thing, and he ultimately is probably diagnosable as a sociopath, no doubt.
Yeah.
But as the storyteller is approaching the material, because we're trying to make somebody who feels real in 3D. So we never wanted this to be, as much as I love it, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, or any of those kinds of movies that were too, like, we didn't want to be a caricature. And I think that's what Tom, ultimately was making sure he was going to be able to do. And there's no doubt that he could. He's such a great actor that I think he really understood what made Jason tick on a gut level. And I think that's why he's so strong in it.
there's a scene in particular. I mentioned the club scene, but it brings me to maybe my favorite scene in the movie, and that's hard to say. But there's a scene with Jackie Weaver, which
Yeah,
that was such a welcome surprise. I was like, wait, what? She's in this? I was like, oh, that's so cool. But
she's great.
there's there's this scene where he's talking to her and he pulls out this pamphlet and it's trying and
I love that prop. I'm very
and I love the fact that it's a pamphlet in particular. I just went, oh my god, this is so grimy that you're just you know that you're it's I love that prop in particular. But she's the one person in the movie, I would say, to the degree that she has, that just flat out calls him on his shit.
right.
And it's one of my favorite. I think that scene in particular is such a turning point because he's probably out of a level 3 out of 10 for desperation. And once that happens, he kind of goes, "Oh crap, things are getting real." Talk to me about directing that scene when because talking about Jason earlier about him maybe being more good than we think, there's this point where he could have just walked away and he stops to get the last word and I just started laughing because I went, oh my god, that is the point of no return right there, because he could have actually let what his mom said words say marinate and actually have some self-reflection, but he takes he goes out of his way to be an asshole, and I
Yeah,
just went, yep, perfect. I went, yep, this is who he is. I love this. So yeah, please
totally.
talk to me about that scene. And
Oh man, yeah, everything you're saying is exactly how I wanted you to react. So that's great. That scene, yeah, it's a favorite of mine too. I actually was asked on a podcast yesterday, I did the Screenwriting Life podcast, and they asked me if you could be remembered for one passage, what would it be? And I said that scene.
really,
Um,
okay.
I was glad, well, that scene, I was answering the questions if I was going to die tomorrow. No, no more movies. But you know, but yeah, no, it was one of my favorite scenes too. I mean, first of all, when you cast someone like Jackie Weaver and you get someone like her in your movie, and you have her and him in a scene, it's pretty powerful, right? Because
Yeah.
these are two very powerful actors. Jackie was such a pleasure. I mean, I've been a fan of hers since, I her movies from the 70s of the Australian New Wave, like Stork. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's
I have
awesome.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So and Picnic at Hanging Rock, Panic at Hanging Rock, which is just a phenomenal film. Peter Weir, and she's worked with so many great directors, from them to David O. Russell to David Michôd. I mean, she's really just a fantastic actress. And so when we did that scene, we actually didn't do any rehearsals before. I mean, they met on the day and they came in and did it,
Oh wow.
and
Okay.
it was really powerful in the room that I kind of realized, like, I storyboarded the whole movie. I had a pretty clear vision of how every scene and shot should look. With that scene, I remember loosening up my approach a little because the blocking kind of like changed on the day. Tom discovered some really cool things of, like, when he got up and walks over to that thing. But it was a pretty honestly, directing a scene like that, I hate to sound so cliche for you, man, but it's easy because they had it so strong between the two
Yeah.
of them that really my job was to put the camera in the right place, and really get out of their way, because there wasn't too much going in and telling them things or anything like that, because they had it, these two. They were really, they were bringing their A game. And so for me as a director, like, I just had to really make sure I photographed it right, and gave them their space and made sure that, because it's an emotional scene, it's an intense scene, especially for Tom's character, because he really, like, goes through the gamut.
Yeah.
And that scene, the other scene you talked about, where he puts the gun up to his friend, right? They ride these emotional roller coasters, right? They kind of go up, down, sideways. You laugh a little bit, and then you're like, oh, and then you're uncomfortable and whatnot. And that's kind of what I was trying to do. One of my favorite filmmakers, Rainer Werner Fassbinder, used to say that a movie has to have humor, tragedy, sadness, sex, violence, death, everything in it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the fun thing about the tone of this movie, and that scene with Jackie encapsulates. It kind of has it all. It's a little funny. It's very sad. It's uncomfortable, and it's tense. And that's what we wanted.
All right. So last question before I let you get out of here. When the credits roll on this, I just kind of sat back and went, "Wow, I'm shocked it ended that way. I'm happy it ended that way." When people watch this movie and they're done and they're reflecting on this, if there's one thing, is there one thing you want your audience to take away from them?
Well, I don't really make message movies where I say like, this is how you should feel about that, or that's how you feel. I made the movie to ultimately examine this dark soul of Jason Derek Brown, to really put the audience in the theater with him, or the streaming room, or to your living room, and just watch it and really take in who this guy was and what he meant, right? And hopefully what it does, I think, is it makes you feel, and it makes you think, and it makes you ask questions. In particular, one question I ask myself, which is two from this movie and writing this film and directing it, the two questions I still ask myself is, why do we fall for con artists, right? Why do we keep falling for them? Because they're not going anywhere.
No.
They're still around. They're now in the zeitgeist more than ever with Anna Delvey and the Firefest guy, and Theranos and all that, right? Madoff, right? There's a lot of fraudsters who kind of are prevalent in our culture. So why does that keep happening, especially in American culture? I mean, it's everywhere, but it's big here. So why to do that? What is this American dream? What's the dark side of it? What does that look like? How does that play out? And then ultimately, can we take someone like Jason Derek Brown, who's rotten to the core, right, and has malintent and doesn't have good intentions at all, and can we move an audience to a place of understanding, compassion, empathy, or retribution, judgment? What is it? How do you feel about him at the end? Because there's no answer. It's not, I'm not saying yes, we can. I'm not saying no, we can't. I'm just saying I think it's a question worth asking. So that's ultimately why I made the film, I think, on an emotional level of what's, why I've spent years of my life working on this, telling the story.
Well, I think you told a great film, and I'm really happy I got a chance to watch it. I'm actually reviewing it tomorrow.
Sweet.
So speaking of the film, so I can let you get out of here. Can you please tell people where they can find you on social media, where they can watch the film, what you have coming up, all that jazz?
Yes. So American Murder will be coming out tomorrow, Friday. When's this dropping? Actually, I could take
tomorrow. Actually, I'm gonna have this upload tomorrow. So
okay. So American Murder is in select theaters as of today, Friday, October 21st. Go see it, please. Bring your friends. If you like it, rate it high on IMDb, Letterboxd. Listeners of this podcast, I just got to say this is an indie film. Doesn't look like one, but it is one. And if you come out and support it, please, you're supporting indie film, and hopefully we can get more movies like this made. So October 21st, today it comes out in theaters. October 28th, if you can't make it to a theater, it will be on digital and VOD, and it'll still be in some theaters too. As far as me, you can follow me on Instagram, Matthew L. Gentile. I'm on there pretty frequently. And my website, MatthewGentileDirector.com, if you want to ask me a question. And as far as what's next, I'm working on another true crime thriller as we speak, called The Socialites. That's planning to shoot that in fall of next year. So fingers crossed, but that's the next thing.
Boom. Awesome. Thank you so much, Matthew, for making the time. This was an absolute pleasure.
My friend, thank you. I'm so glad to hear you loved it so much and that it spoke to you. Your questions really showed that you watched it and engaged with it. So thank you. It's fun to do these when that's the case.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I'll definitely tag you in the review when it comes out. But yeah, awesome, hopefully we can talk after the next crime drama. But thanks again. You have a good night. All right.
Yeah, you'll have me for any of my movies. Thank you, Josh.
All right. Take care.